What is up, Bitcoin miners? We are here today with ePIC Blockchain Technologies with Earl and Juno. Super excited about this conversation. Well, every time we bring on developers, builders, people who are building really cool products in the space, I always get a little like antsy because I'm like, oh man, I just wanna like know everything about it. But sometimes like I feel like I can get too technical and too far in the weeds. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, that's why we bring them on. We let them go get in the weeds and, you know, teach us and teach the audience. And I kind of feel the same way. I got to hear what's being built in the space. I've got to kind of, it's a weird time, right? Like during bear markets is when all the building happens, but you don't really hear about it until the bull market. And it'd be really nice if we could hear more about it. Of course, there's that period where, builders, developers need to be head down and focused on their tasks and their goals and shipping. But if we heard more about things being built during bear markets that are being built during bear markets, I think people sentiment would be better, you know? And so, yeah, it's great. I don't think we're in a bear market right now, but sentiment right now is kind of crap.
We're
And
moving sideways and hash price is down. So I don't
hash
know. I
price
don't know
is
what.
hurting.
Yeah, it's bad, but that's not the topic of our conversation today. I don't want to focus on the sad things because if
Well,
I
that's
if
why
I
we
think
bring these guys on, right? So they can
exactly.
kind of cheer us up, show us all the productivity that's happening in the industry. And I'm excited to hear more about what they're doing.
Absolutely. So we are here today with Juno, who is head of business development. I don't know if she's the head of business development, but they're a small team. So I'm going to say head of business development, and she'll correct me if I'm wrong. And we have Earl, who is the CTO, but he's also just kind of like dives into all different parts and aspects of the business, sales, all kinds of things. Super excited about it. But before we do that, guys, I want to tell you guys about the the Mastermind conference, Mastermind Club. Sorry.
Welcome to the Mastermind Club, your ultimate gateway into the world of Bitcoin mining. Whether you're just starting out or looking to scale your operations, our vibrant community of like-minded enthusiasts is here to support you every step of the way. Join us for weekly sessions led by industry pros, where you'll exchange ideas, brainstorm strategies, and stay motivated on your mining journey. From heat management to site optimization, our monthly deep dives cover the technical know-how you need to succeed. And with access to our entire back catalog, you'll never miss a beat. But that's not all. Our members enjoy exclusive one-on-one sessions with veteran miners, plus direct access to special pre-sales and insider opportunities at Bitcoin Mining World. Ready to take your mining to the next level? Join the Mastermind Club today and secure your spot in the future of Bitcoin mining. Visit bitcoinminingworld.com or scan the QR code now. And now back to the show.
All right, we are back, everybody. That was the Mastermind Club. You guys can scan the QR code to go and see what that is all about. But I want to get into the meat of this. So today we're here, like I said, with Juno, with Earl. How are you guys doing today?
Great,
Oh, good. Thanks
amazing.
for having us.
Awesome. We're super excited about this. I really want to dive into like how your guys' company is, setting a pace, changing the landscape of Bitcoin mining hardware in the space. There's this whole idea of owning your hardware, and you guys are really setting the standard for that. And so we'll dive into that a little bit later in the episode. But before we do that, Earl, Juno, I'd like to just kind of get a little bit of your backgrounds in, tech, in the industry. What kind of brought you to Bitcoin? Whatever one of you guys want to go first, just kind of like tell us how you got into Bitcoin and then why you decided to work on the tech side of things.
I think I'll go first and I'll let Juno go second. So early on in Bitcoin, everyone started mining, be it be on GPUs, FPGAs, or even CPUs at the time. ASICs weren't around. And I happened to work at a company called AMD, which was formerly ATI. So I spent about a decade and a half developing graphics processors for a living, which meant I had access to the hardware, and I started mining, and it was interesting. But that didn't go further than that. A few years later, a bunch of friends approached me and said, we should do Bitcoin mining. And I told them it's going to cost a lot of money. Doing hardware is not cheap. I come from a hardware background. And we took a leap of faith, and that was 8 years ago. And that's how we founded ePIC Blockchain, and that's where we are today. So ePIC Blockchain is a hardware-focused company, not necessarily just focused on mining. We do anything to do with blockchain itself, may it be from servers, Web3 gaming, all the way down to the mining itself. But a lot of the focus we have is dedicated to Bitcoin mining and how we can get more people into mining and help people mine better. So we have a line of products that we kind of focus on, may it be custom systems. So we work with different chip vendors to make Bitcoin rigs that are custom to the end user, not these traditional shoe boxes that people see, but in any shape or form you want. We do custom chip design, which is our bread and butter background. To this day, initially we focused on altcoins, but as mining kind of matured, Bitcoin mining seems to be the holy grail of what people do now. And finally, we do something we call fleet enhancement, which means custom firmware, controllers, power supplies. And that's really where I believe the home miners can really focus on and take advantage of. I don't think a lot of people want to buy a custom system. It's going to take a lot of money and time. But upgrading your existing hardware, getting more out of your hardware, or even maximizing profits at this point is where we see a lot of advantages in this fleet enhancement space. Juno?
I can beat the introduction. So mine is way more simpler. So I am on the business development side of ePIC. So how I describe my job is I talk to a bunch of people. I try to figure out ways to help them and how they can help me, and together how we can help each other. So I manage vendor relationships. I talk to customers. I talk to different partners. Our company only has 20 plus people, and then so we run a tight ship here. So as to how I get into Bitcoin, it was, I remember it was the peak of COVID, and I was freshly out of grad school. And my background was in kinesiology, which is like a totally different area from this. And then, so all the offices were shutting down, and they were trying to figure out, navigate this whole COVID situation, how to manage workers from home. They were trying to just like navigate this whole mess. And therefore, that makes job hunting really difficult. And right around that point, it's when I hear people start talking about Bitcoin because it's inflationary, and it is decentralized. So that was on my radar for a bit. And then after many happy accidents, I got brought along on the ePIC team, and I've been with ePIC ever since.
Awesome. I love hearing people's backgrounds and like how they get into Bitcoin. You know, everyone comes from Bitcoin from different personal aspects. You know, Will, he's been in Bitcoin since 2011. I've been here since 2022, somewhere around there. And it's interesting. We all kind of like focus in on the non-inflationary aspect, and we also focus on the decentralization. And you know, on the topic of decentralization, I think what you guys are doing at ePIC Blockchain is super important to that, because you are enabling, you know, home miners and businesses to do something with heat reuse, you know, that has never before been seen. And now people can actually like own their hardware in a way that hasn't been done before. You know, Earl, you talk about, you know, being able to design custom hardware options for these specific people, whereas like the large industrial miners, the large you know, Bitmain and like WhatsMiner, they're just building these machines for like industry applications. And that's all fine and dandy when we get like used hardware. But when we want to stay competitive, maybe on a smaller scale, like we really want to make sure that we're getting the best hardware that we can possibly get. And when you guys are building stuff like for us, it feels really good as like, you know, the pleb side of things.
Yeah, so one of the things, like you mentioned, heat reuse, and all of us at home have varying electricity costs. I'm a home miner as well. I run about a petahash at home for the last year. It's been a petahash. Before that, it was about half of that, but I run about 30 kilowatts 24/7. And with heat reuse, it can bring down my cost of electricity. That's one of the ways where we see benefits to home mining. Not everyone needs to run a megawatt, 100 megawatts, a gigawatt. There's decentralization, and if all of us chip in and run these applications, these machines at home, we're able to decentralize the network, secure the network, but also benefit. We gain Bitcoin, we heat our house, and it offsets that electricity cost, which makes it kind of difficult now to compete against the large players. There's no way that I'm going to get 2 cents at home. I'm here in Canada, and I pay about the equivalent of 9 cents US. But with new subsidies from the government, with time of use and electric charging, I can mine for about 18 hours a day at 2 cents US. But that requires me to turn on my machines at exactly 4 p.m. and shut them off and then downclock them in peak hours. And to do that, the default software firmware that you can get from these large miners, Bitmain, MicroBT, Canaan, and all of them, it doesn't really work. So that's where we kind of see this niche where there's this option for the home miners to kind of play in. And all of us should mine if it's beneficial from a monetary point of view or from an ecosystem point of view. So that whole, how do I mine at 2 cents? It's doable here in Toronto, Canada, where I'm located. People just have to figure out how to do it. And that's one of the reasons why we find this product, this UMC that we'll talk about later on, very valuable.
Earl, in Toronto, what is like, without some of the solutions and different, I guess, strategies that you're using to reduce your cost, what is the common cost per kilowatt hour that anyone would pay?
In Toronto, it'd be about 9 cents US kilowatt hour is what typical electricity prices are. It's not the highest based in the States. Some of the states, California, have higher and some have lower. But 9 cents, right now, it's break even for me if I were to mine 24/7 on the latest machines. It's pretty tight. But if I can reduce that down to 2 cents, which I can, and then run for 3/4 of a day, there's a huge opportunity there. Because I'm competing against these industrial miners who are running at 3 or 4 cents.
Yeah. I mean, I talk to people a lot, just trying to work on my own mining project. And, you know, they look at mining, if they're not involved already, they look at mining at a high level and they immediately kind of rule it out for themselves because it's like, oh, my utility prices are too high, or, you know, the barrier of entry is too high. And so they just kind of write it off. But with strategies like what you guys are developing, maybe they shouldn't. Can you kind of dive a little deeper in detail about, you know, how we can, as evangelists for mining, for pleb mining or even medium-sized mines, help these people get over that hump?
Yeah, so there's simple things. Your biggest costs are the equipment and the cost of electricity. Right now, with hash price being so low, as I mentioned earlier, there's a huge opportunity for secondary machines, used machines on the secondary market at this point. We've checked prices, and an S19J stock running at 3 kilowatts, 29.5 joules of efficiency can be downclocked to a substantial level that it makes it possible to run at home even at 9 cents. But that being said, you have to kind of look at the overall picture. Your biggest cost is either the machine or power. How can you optimize those things? And as I mentioned before, used equipment is a great way to go. There's a glut of used equipment on the market right now, which makes it very opportunistic if you're looking to expand. But the next thing you kind of look at is, I have power costs. How do I reduce that? Heat reuse is one way to offset the power costs. People have tried solar. People have tried a huge slew of different options. But for me, taking advantage of the electrical vehicle subsidies here in Ontario makes it very beneficial. People usually charge their electric cars overnight, right? And the government knows that, and they said, okay, buy an electric car, charge it overnight, electricity will be cheap. And that's how you get down to 2 cents US. During the times where everyone's coming home from work, turning on the oven, the microwave, the TV, well, not the TV so much anymore, but those other things, you just don't use electricity or use a lot less. And scaling up and scaling down is how we look at things. Running the machines at nighttime when it's cooler is much more beneficial. You're more efficient when you run machines cooler as well. So there's a lot of little tweaks that you can take advantage of that you really can't do with a stock machine. It does require a little more work, a little more management, but once you get it all going, it's kind of set it and forget it. I don't look at my machines often anymore. I make sure I still get paid, and I make sure that the little bit of humming noise is still heard inside and outside the house, but that's about it. I don't know, Juno, how would you take advantage of mining here? in the
Yeah,
city.
like you said, used equipment is extremely cheap right now. I think that you covered most of the point in terms of, like how do you have a more strategic energy agreement with your local power supplier. Those are the things I don't have access to, but like only one thing, the one thing that stood out to me is buy used equipment that's super cheap and then downclock it so that it's running efficiently.
Yeah, so I do remember Juno used to mine at home too. She would only mine in wintertime, and she would run it pretty much silent at that point. But I don't think she needs a heater in summer here in Toronto.
Yeah, that's kind of an issue with a lot of people. It's like I only generally mine for heat. I'm a pleb home miner, and I really see it as like, oh, I can save a lot of money on my heat. But in the summertime, like I'm not going to heat my house because I don't want to die from heat, and then my wife would also kill me. So like let's not do that. But what you're kind of talking about is, if you're a home miner not necessarily using the heat reuse for heating your home, you can use this board, your hardware, to underclock and overclock the machine at certain times throughout the day, and just kind of like time it and optimize it for your specific needs, right? So what I mean, maybe we can dive into this now. What specific, I know that you've got the perpetual tuning algorithm that helps to tune the chips individually for efficiency, but what other like functionalities does your hardware have that allows miners to do specific things?
I think it might be a good point for us to show you what the dashboard look like, have a general walkthrough. I think that might be a little bit more helpful in
Awesome.
terms of showing what we talk about. 1 second, share screens.
Doing live demos is always fun, and this will be interesting.
Yeah, it'll be good. We'll just
It's always an adventure.
Okay, can everybody see my screen? Yes, amazing. Okay, so this is our dashboard. How you get here is basically you can just plug in the IP of your miner, and then this will show up. So this is on a homepage, which kind of shows you a very high level information about the health of your miner. So on top of here, you see like the mining pool hash rate, the temperature, the power. This, I believe, is an estimate on the older S19 series. This is a power estimate, but in the newer model for the S21 and potentially onwards, that would be a accurate power reading. So also means that the efficiency here is also estimate. And here you can see like how the boards are performing. And then as you scroll down, you can see this beautiful graph of your hash rate, your status on the mining and uptime. And here is more details on your miner itself, what kind of model it is, what's your worker name, etc. So in here is Trevor, you talked about perpetual tuning. So perpetual tune is a general tuning algorithm we use. But under the umbrella of perpetual tuning, we have 3 different algorithms, which we can dive into as well later on. So as we scroll down, you have more granular information about the boards, each board, and how the chips are performing. So you have the drop-down menu, we have different information on the chip. And as we navigate through the left side, you can see different setting options. So first, let's go to see cooling. And this is your temperature guards. And here you can set your shutdown temperature and your critical temperature. So shutdown temperature, when you are approaching the shutdown temperature, the machine will shut down. But once the temperature has cooled enough, it would restart itself. But once you set the machine hits critical temperature, it would not restart, just to protect the machine. And here
So
we navigate.
The fan tab really quick. A lot of times in your home mining, the fans are probably the biggest pain in the butt due to noise. And stock machines don't give you a lot of control over the fans. And with most custom firmware, the fan options there, it's straightforward and simple. One of the features that I like the most here is what happens when the fans are running, but the machine has stopped mining. As I mentioned earlier, one of my use cases is to shut down the machines during high energy cost times. And the fans typically burn between 200 and 300 watts at idle. And one of the features here that you should be using is shutting down your fans to a lower threshold when the machine's not operating. So Juno can show there's a sliding bar that when it's idle, will stop the fans running at 20%, which burns very little power, but also gives enough airflow through the machine to keep everything safe. Even when these machines are in a powered down state, they still draw power. They still need to be actively cooled. So doing that will help you reduce a lot of power wasted if you're not mining. A lot of people just stop the miner and assume that, oh, we've stopped mining, we're good now, but it's still about 10% of your overall power budget being wasted. Another thing here is being able to control the fans at a temperature limit. The machines were built to run at a specific temperature. As chips get more advanced, the temperature dependency on performance is very critical. They're kind of come in pairs. So keeping a machine too cool, if you're putting this outside in sub-zero temperature, it's actually not efficient. Keeping it too hot is also not efficient. There's always a sweet spot for every machine type out there. And if you can adjust the fans to keep that sweet spot, you end up getting the most efficient miner out there. But a lot of times I see people just blasting the fans at 100%. Oh, I need to cool this machine. The cooler, the better. That once was the case, but machines don't work like that anymore. In the S9, S17 generation, maybe early S19s, that was the case. But nowadays, with these newer models that we're seeing, getting to the sweet spot of temperature, especially with micro BT, is very important.
Yeah, I just have a little quick anecdotal story. I use your guys' board for my S19 at home, and I actually run an aftermarket fan. I use an AC Infinity fan, and I have a really cool board that kind of controls, like allows the control board to control the fan. And I really wasn't very aware of like how I should do it, and I was running my fan at full power. And what happened? So I had it at full power, and the room got hot, and I hadn't been using the perpetual tuning algorithm to shut the machine down. So everything got really, really hot inside of there. And the blades on the fan actually like started to melt and they weakened. And what happened is my entire fan actually like imploded. And I've got it in here, but like the fan just kind of blew up. You know what I mean? And the entire miner just kind of like stopped, like started throwing all kinds of things like notifications and like warnings for me. And I was like, what the heck happened? The fan won't turn on. Like, what's going on here? And I tore it apart. I was like, oh, well, I guess I should have monitored that a little bit better. So using this specifically to help, keep the fan at a proper power percentage and keeping the temperature of the chips, ideal is very important. And I think it's just better to understand how it all works rather than just like setting it and forgetting it when you don't know what you're doing. And that's kind of like where I was. I didn't really know what I was doing. And so this is fun to learn actually like how I should be monitoring and setting the settings for my individual machines.
And then another thing that's very useful is a lot of times when you're mining at home, you just don't want noise. Typical ambient noise of 50 to 55 dB is what people kind of aim for if they're putting this in their living room, bedroom, basement. I don't know where people put miners nowadays, miner in my basement, but this allows you to kind of find that sweet spot of how much fan noise I can tolerate and what temperature I can get to and kind of set it and be safe at that same time, because there are critical failure checks here where sometimes the house just gets hot. Sunlight shines in, and we had sunlight issues earlier. It's sunny where we are. And this allows you to kind of control this in a more granular fashion. And with stock firmware, it's not something that was the intended use case of these machines. They're more along the lines of turn them on, rack them up as many as we can, and move on to the next.
Yeah, absolutely. So Juno, go ahead and continue with your presentation. This is very interesting. I'm really excited to learn more.
Yeah, feel free to stop me if you have any, more stories to tell. I think that that's a great story that you just told us here. So a lot of people actually ask us if we have the immersion mode. So we don't. The critical two safeguards we have, it's temperature. So if your machine reach a certain temperature, it will shut down. And then here, as you see here, minimum working fans required. So you can, for immersion, you just have to turn it 0 so that the machine was still running even the fans are not on. So the implication of that is some people have like, maybe one fan fell, but like 3 fans is still in air. I'm speaking of air-cooled conditions. So if your miner has 1 fan missing, but the 3 fans are still running pretty well, that's usually enough for the miner to continue operation. So this is what this feature is for. So moving on next to the mining config. This is basically where you set up your pool, your worker name, etc. And then you can append unique ID based on your IP address, MAC address, CPU ID. Moving along, network. This is basically where you set your static IP if you wish to do so. Some people like to, give a miner a specific IP address and never change. And this is the place to do that.
Now, this is something that, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you for too long. This is something that I don't see on my board at home specifically. Is this because I have the version 4 of the board and not the newest version?
It could be just a firmware. We can talk about this after. Yeah,
Okay.
firmware update.
So
yeah.
Typically speaking, I know Juno wanted to mention this a little later on, but as a company, we've strived to release a firmware update once a month with new features, new updates, bug fixes. It typically happens on the 14th of the month, I hope. I'll check in on that because that's coming up in a few days. But if you go on the latest firmware, this feature should be already there. It's a very finicky feature in the sense that if you set a static IP and you set it wrong, you have to do a hard reset to kind of recover from it. So it's if you've ever done networking, you'll understand why it becomes very finicky. But the option is there for the end user who knows what they're doing to take advantage of it.
Gotcha.
A lot of people, as Juno mentioned, like to assign machines to a location and a number.
Yeah.
Even the large guys do that too. So that's why.
Well, maybe I won't play around with that in the end because I'm not the not the most advanced user.
Yeah. So networking is a voodoo magic art to me sometimes, and DHCP allows you to get IPs automatically, and typically that's what most people use. But in some cases, they like to hardwire the numbers in there so that every reboot, it doesn't get a new IP. You know where your machines are.
Yeah, that's always a confusing thing for me. Like I try to, my father-in-law and I are running a mining operation just out at his house, and I'm trying to teach him how mining works, and I'm trying to teach myself how mining works as well. So sometimes when the machine reboots, the IP address changes, and then he can't find the IP address, and it's like, Trevor, I can't find this damn miner. Like, where did it go? And I'm like, you got to go here, and you have to look for it in thing. It says C miner somewhere, and so I could see how this setting could be helpful for some people, but again, at the end of the day, if you don't know what you're doing and you mess it up and it needs a hard reset, that seems like more hassle than it's worth to just go through and find it each time. So
yeah, and there are many tools out there that can scan the IPs quickly for you. So it's we also have a mining tool, management tool that allows you to do that. So that should be pretty easy to accomplish to find IP.
For sure. Awesome. Let's go move on to performance. I think this is the spot that I was most excited to learn more about, just how we can, maintain our performance or, up the performance of the machines.
So this is the step before. So this is actually where you manually tune the machine, so you can set your own frequency and your voltage. So some people like to tinker with the machine, so they found a sweet spot for their particular machine, and then they can set it here. And then as in down here, you see the advanced settings. So this is only applicable for XP and K Pro. So their chips behaves in a not so regular pattern when you are overclocking. So by turning on this mode, we found out a way to squeeze out a little bit more performance on those chips on the XP and the K Pro when you are overclocking. And Trevor, I believe what you're talking about is the perpetual tune, which is the very exciting part. Like I said before.
Just go back one, June. So to give a little color on this a
Yeah.
bit,
We
in
can
the
wait to
early
get to the perpetual
days,
side.
in the early days, people had to tune their machines manually. You had to find the right voltage, the right frequency, as Juno mentioned, to find the sweet spot of the machine. And it's a tedious process, but it's also a fun process, especially when you're trying to overclock, even from the CPU overclocking. You kind of find that voltage where you can hit that clock where everything's stable and it works wonderfully. One of the things here is when you're overclocking or underclocking the machine with these settings, you're determining what is good enough. The machine could be running at 80% efficiency, but you've now hit the highest clock rate frequency that you've ever seen. That's up to the user to decide. All the safeguards, temperature, fan, throttle, all those are still there, but this really gives you complete control of how you control your machine. And to this day, some people still believe in this, but if I told you you had one machine to tune, you'd be like, yeah, I can do that. If you had 10, it's going to take some time. If you have 100, 1,000, 10,000, tuning this doesn't become realistic, but it's still doable. And I still do it to find a good starting point for my machines, because when we go to perpetual tune later on, we'll quickly see that you need to give it some input for it to do its job. Based on the ambient temperature, your starting point could be higher than stock if it's cold outside. If it's really hot outside, which is here in Toronto today, running stock with bad cooling, bad air, you might not be able to start at that 100 terahash, which I believe this machine is. You might want to start lower. And that's really how I kind of figure out where a good starting point is, by tuning things manually. And then I move on to the next, Juno.
Yeah, so here it's more like set it and forget it kind of situation. So we have the perpetual tune algorithm. So underneath there are 3 types of tuning. And I see that we have one tuning on a system basis, and tuning on a board basis, and tuning on a chip basis. So voltage optimizers you see here, it's more tuning on a system basis. So you can just here set your target hash rate, and then set that a minimal throttle, and then set your throttle step, and then the machine would automatically try to reach that hash rate target at the most efficient point. And then also has a built-in survival mode. What it is basically when it's approaching the shutdown temperature, it will automatically throttles down. So you're preventing the machine potentially overheats and have to shut down and turn on again. And then this helps you to minimize your downtime. And what minimal throttle is just means that this is the hash rate target that the algorithm would try to hit before it try to hit. And if the machine doesn't cool down at that point, it will then shut down. And then throttle step is the increments that the hash rate target would move.
So to give a quick example of how I would use this is, I want to get the maximum hash rate out of my machines during the times where I want to mine. As I mentioned before, I'm not worried about power costs. I'm sitting down at 2 cents US. So I have a machine here. I want to extract that maximum amount of hash rate out. And what I typically would do with this was set these numbers a little bit differently than everyone else. That's why it's important to understand what it's doing. I would set the target to 140, which is a 40% overclock over stock. And I know that with the cooling I have in my setup, 140 can only be reached in the wintertime. So what happens here is it would try to run at 140 terahashes, which is a 40% overclock. That's 40% more performance than you get from stock, but then it would quickly overheat. So the first thing that would trigger is that overheating, and it would start to throttle. So the throttle step here in this picture is 5 terahashes. The machine now would drop to 135 terahashes and try to mine at 135. Most likely that's a little too warm to achieve in this temperature, this climate, and it would continually step down. And most likely in this climate that I have here in Toronto right now, I would hit about 115. And it would sit at 115 and mine there as long as the temperatures are in a safe limit. What happens next is it starts to get cool at night here, and there ends up being more cool air. The chips cool down a little bit further, and based on a temperature trigger, it will start creeping up with that same throttle step. So at nighttime, I'll probably hit 105 terahashes. During peak afternoon, I'll probably drop down to 105 terahashes. And that perpetual tune will run constantly throughout the day, kind of maximizing my hash rate. Some important things one should consider when you're mining at home. This doesn't take into consideration how much power is being used. I know that at 140 terahashes, these machines will draw about 4 kilowatts, which is a safe number for the power supply that I have on there and for my breaker and my circuits. So people need to kind of understand a little bit more when they're trying to overclock or underclock. And if we get into a situation where my exhaust fans kind of die, like it happened to you, but these are my exhaust outlet fans, I won't be able to cool as much, and it'll keep trying down to 50 terahashes where it'll finally just say, something's seriously wrong here, guys. I'm at 50 terahashes, as the setting says there, for a minimum throttle, and I can't cool this machine. I'm just going to stop. But if you set these bands within a range where you think you can oscillate in, you end up getting the maximum performance on your machine throughout the day as ambient temperatures change and other factors change in your mining. So that's why I mentioned it's pretty important earlier on to use that performance tab to kind of find out where you belong in your current situation, because that's a more of a manual thing to do. Juno?
So, well, real quick before Juno, before I let you go, I think this is really important for the audience to understand that, like, you finally before this kind of hardware came out and came to market, you didn't really own your hardware. You couldn't really manage this. You couldn't mess around with the settings and really optimize for your specific environment and your specific hardware that you have. But what you guys have done is you put it in the hands of the user, which can be super beneficial, but also I feel like there is also this limit of, like, you can also destroy your machine. And so this is where this perpetual tuning algorithm really comes in handy, because you're allowing your machine to kind of read itself and learn from the environment and what needs to be taken into account, so that you're not overclocking your chips to the point where they explode or they no longer work, because after a certain threshold the efficiency starts to drop, but then even you start to degrade the life expectancy of these. So what I think we're really seeing here is that running this voltage optimizer and the perpetual tune allows miners like myself, home miners, let's say I only have one machine, this would allow me to maximize the lifespan of my machine and not have to worry about, upgrading my machine over time because, something breaks or a hash board fails.
Yeah, exactly what you said. So a lot of people also use this feature in very hot climates, when in West Texas, so that they are not, the machines are not overheating. So what I mentioned about the survival mode is, what it does is that it automatically downclocks when the temperature becomes too hot. So that really helps you to preserve the lifespan of your machine. And there's another implication of this voltage optimizer is that if you put this in let's say a immersion tank, right? And then the temperature is getting too hot. If we didn't put on this minimal throttle on, the machine would constantly keep on running. And then for some reason, if the heat pumps is not working properly, this is generating heat, and then you're risking like frying the whole machine. So we do take in a lot of safety consideration into how to protect, the miners itself, so that you're not frying your machine.
Yeah, it's incredible. I'm learning so much just from watching you guys do this, and I'm hoping that the audience kind of learns a lot as well. And so continue with your presentation. I'd love to see what else we can learn.
Yeah, so like I just mentioned, we tune on a system level. We also tune the board level and then chip level. So next on the board level, we have this thing called board tune. What it does is sets the chips on each board the same hash rate. So like each board had the chips on the board with having the same hash rate. And then we will adjust the voltage to make sure that the machine is running at the most efficient at the certain clock. that's set on the board. So it's pretty it's a very similar to voltage optimizer here. And this it's kind of like the intermediate step between voltage optimizer and chip tune. Chip tune would take a little bit longer to tune because you're tuning on the chip level, but board you're tuning on the board level. So the next step.
So one of the things about the board tune is if your ambient temperature changes very quickly, I think today in Toronto, we'll have a swing of about 20 degrees Celsius in a matter of 4 or 5 hours. It takes time for chip tune to do its thing. Each chip is treated individually. So we'll go on to the next. But board tune is, as Juno mentioned, is that kind of half step. It's actually much faster to tune the system. It's doing each board. So there's only 3 of them versus voltage optimizer, which does the whole system as a whole. So it really accelerates that process. So you can get to where you need to be much quicker. It's not for everyone. Everyone has different use cases. For me, I like using board tune because I can get to the end result in a short amount of time, especially when I'm trying to adjust my machines to an optimal point. That's better used for me because, as Juno will mention, chip tune takes a lot longer.
Yeah, so moving on here, just chip tune, like Earl mentioned, it's adjusting on each chip so that it's constantly adjusting the frequency on the chip so that we make sure we are the most efficient, most performant at the given with the changing voltage. So that's all the 3 tuning algorithm that we have. So Trevor, Will, do you guys have any questions?
Will actually had to drop out. He's having some technical difficulties,
Okay.
but really, I mean, you really explained a lot of how this works. I think that for myself, in my situation, the voltage optimizer is probably the best for me. But now I have a better understanding of how I can overclock and underclock the machine based on the ambient temperature in the room. I guess one of my biggest questions is, how do people, besides going and finding out the temperature thresholds, is there like a specific threshold for each machine, or do you guys kind of have like some write-ups for that so that we can, because I see that when you were back in the performance section, I see your guys's temperature settings, like for the for when it shuts down versus when it like completely like it's got the critical temperature and the shutdown temperature. Those are much higher than what I have mine set at. And I think what I'm having an issue with on my machine is it hits that shutdown temperature quite often. And so I'm just kind of curious, is there a specific temperature that I can find, or are you guys kind of going above the temperature? What's kind of happening here?
So I'll take that question. I can answer that every machine will be slightly different. There is no one shoe fits all kind of guideline for this. One of the most important things is to try to figure out what others have done in this space. There's lots of resources online where you can kind of talk to people who said, I've run the machine this hot, or I've set it to this. But it comes down to 2 things. One is, what temperature are you really reading that we're reading, what we're presenting to you? And typically there are only 2 temperatures in the system. One is the board temperature, which is an external to the actual chip themselves, and then chip temperature. So board temperature is a very rough estimate. It's a sensor that's on the hash board itself. Typically speaking, on a hash board, you have an inlet board temperature and an outlet. So you'll see the temperature of the air coming in and the temperature of the air coming out. And what we've seen from there is it's a rough estimate on the system as itself. The second one is the chip temperature. That one is more of an exact science. It tells you the temperature of the chip, the silicon, and the chips are made at a foundry. The foundry rates their chips to 125 degrees Celsius. And that is probably the upper limit of the chip temperature you should ever see. We've worked with machines in the past where 110 degrees Celsius at the chip is acceptable, but every machine, every chip is different. So that's something that you kind of have to learn from others. You're lucky if someone else is more adventurous to try this out. I can comfortably say with Bitmain, setting these limits as you see on the screen to 95-100 from their S19 to S21 is fairly safe, but that's one of the reasons why stock firmware is so restrictive. These are expensive machines that have warranties, and they would like to honor the warranties if you don't overclock them. So that's where I cannot exactly tell you how to do things. It's up to you to figure out. But
I
it's a
guess
fine line of tiptoeing.
Yeah, and you know, for someone like myself, I mean, these machines, these are not cheap machines. I mean, my K Pro costs $2,500. It's an expensive machine, and so I'm always scared of like overclocking because I don't wanna blow this machine up because I don't want to have to like send it in for repairs or you know spend the money for the repairs. So I guess that was just kind of one of my curiosities is like why is my machine shutting down so frequently, and that's what's been happening. And I guess I just need to play around with the shutdown temperature and the critical temperatures, because right now I've got my shutdown temperature set at 65 and it hits that 65 threshold really quickly, and I'm just like I read on Bitmain, I'm like, this is the temperature that it's supposed to be at, like it shouldn't go over this temperature. I'm like, well, what is happening here? So now it's good to get that information.
I can say 65 is a little bit low.
Yeah.
Typically, we see these things run about 85 stock.
Okay.
As you can see in this picture here, I'm running this machine. I think, is this machine at my house, Juno?
Yes, this is in your basement.
Yeah, so I'm running these up to 100 degrees Celsius at this point, and this machine's been down there for longer than a year. But it really comes down to what you're comfortable with, how much you want to push these machines. It's still summertime here in Toronto, so this limit will be higher during the summer. And in the wintertime, I'll dial it back down because the air coming in is still quite warm. So it's something that you kind of have to learn with experience. I don't recommend overclocking if it's something you're not comfortable with. But Bitmain does have stock settings where they've qualified the machines, and that's something you should be aiming for. And I believe the stock setting on the K Pros at least is 85 degrees Celsius. I probably have a K Pro somewhere in my house right now too, and that's probably set to the same settings as these because I'm comfortable with that.
Yeah, definitely find your comfort setting and your comfort level. A lot of it comes with experience. You know, I've only been doing this for a few months now, and every time that I kind of play around with the firmware and like the dashboard, I always learn a little bit more. And then you got to let it run for a little while and see how it reacts to that, and then just play around with it. So I think this presentation that you did, Juno, really helps the audience and myself understand. I think, you know, Will kind of dropped out a little bit, and I'm not sure if he even has an ePIC control board on any of his machines, but really like this is super helpful for the audience to learn like how they can play around with their machines and get the most juice for what they're putting into it.
Yeah, I have a question
Yeah.
regarding that because we aren't currently using, I mean, we don't have many miners running at the moment. We're kind of in a holding pattern with scaling up our operation, but we do have environmental challenges when it comes to running our machines optimally. You know, we're out in a desert climate, which also is in the northern United States and gets very cold. You know, so the location is in Wyoming and we're out in the desert, very hot in the summer, lots of dust, lots of wind, and then in the winter, extremely cold as well. So I think, you know, I guess my question is, you know, can we use your product in such like environmentally demanding of a setup, or is it really more well suited for indoors?
I would take that question part of yes, for sure. So the origin of even why we develop AutoFan first is because we have some customers running their miners without firmware in a very cold climate. So what happened was, like Earl mentioned, these chips have a perfect temperature window they want to live on. What happened was in those cold climates, it was too cold, so the chips are actually running less efficiently. So how we resolve that problem is by developing this auto fan feature where the fans would automatically, you know, runs less so that it could maintain a certain temperature when the miner's running so that the chips are more efficient in those climates. So, and then in the extreme weather, as we mentioned before, the perpetual tune, the survival mode in voltage optimizer should resolve that issue.
So the whole goal is to keep the miner running as long as possible throughout changing ambient conditions. And that was the end goal of the whole firmware development for us. So between the fans, the tuning of the machine should run 24/7. And if that's your use case, that's where the word perpetual comes from. It should always continually tune. Years ago, people just put a setting in, and if they did that setting during the middle of the night, it would be great for the middle of the night. And then daytime would hit with a huge temperature swing, and that setting would be no longer valid. So there is no one setting that kind of works throughout. You can probably get away with a super low setting that you would never have to worry about your machine overheating. But as things change, your performance should change, your tune should change. And that's really what we need to drive home when people are mining. You can do it manually, and that's perfectly fine. Some people like to do that, but really software is there to take advantage of these situations to extract that most out of the machine that you have.
Yeah, and I think that that would really help us because, you know, we are having to do a lot of things manually and for a lot of reasons, not just to optimize the miners, but just to, you know, manage the site and things like that. And so I think this is I love all these like remote control solutions for managing your farm. I think it's amazing. And you know, there's just so much to learn. Like I want to play with it. I want to try it out,
And
even though we're not at scale yet, you know.
And that's the whole point. I think that leads us to the next tab. I think, Juno, we can skip down to the API tab. The API is a way for you to directly send command or receive information from the miner. And we have this well documented. We'll go through a quick show demo shortly, but everything we do from auto fan to tuning the machine, voltage optimizations, setting frequencies, setting chip clocks is all done through our API. So whatever we're doing in this automated perpetual tune that people use, you can yourself as the end user write your own programs, even a script in Python, depending on what you're comfortable with, to control your machine. And that's where you get this complete customizability of your hardware. We think we know what you want from your machine, but really everyone's use case is different. So the API is here for those users who really want to take advantage of that. And I don't know, Juno, can you run through an example of how the API works? Or
so trying to look. So let's say we want to adjust the shutdown temperature here. So we can see here, the code is like exactly right here. And hold on. Where is it?
so the text there probably is a little too small to see, but what you get in the documentation or what you see in front of you is the actual code you can copy and paste into yours to do an API call. You can also set it and change it and execute it live. So instead of using the GUI that we saw earlier where we can change that shutdown temperature, we can do it here through code. And the end user now can use this to their advantage. So what I do at home is I use the simple command stop miner to stop the miners. And instead of me having to go in and click stop on every little machine, I have up to 10 machines running. That's a lot of work. I will send this command to all the miners and they stop. Nice and simple.
Yeah.
Most of the firmwares have stop, but now you can do more advanced things.
Yeah. So I just sorry. As Earl was talking, I'm still under the shutdown temperature. You can try it out to see how this API executes, and then try it out. And then you come down here. You want to change the shutdown temperature, let's say 90, and then I can just execute.
And that's it. It's a very simple process, and people can write code and manage the machines themselves. So
Yeah,
whatever
and then
we do and whatever we control in our software, we give and expose to the end user. So it's whatever you're comfortable with. As Juno's touching temperature controls, that's something that most people are comfortable playing with. You can now go in and adjust individual chip clocks, PSU voltages, everything is there. And it's all documented, open, and it helps people now take it to the next level. How do you get more out of the machine if you had complete control of it?
Yeah, wow. This is something that I've never even clicked on the API tab just because I part of me is just not comfortable with it. But I've heard that there's a lot of things that you can do. Like you can get external sensors and hook those up and run scripts that, shut the miner off or on based on the temperature of that thermostat outside of the machine itself.
Yeah, and even if you're not comfortable kind of setting the machine, there are get commands which gives you valuable information from the machine. So a lot of times people write their own dashboards and their own programs to monitor the machines. Everything we display in this web GUI that you see in front of you can be obtained directly through a command, and then you can present it in your own way. So not everyone wants to monitor the machine one at a time, like you see here in front of you. You
Mhm.
want to check all your machines, add them all together, and display them. So this allows you to get every single bit of information, including the logs. So some of our more advanced clients are parsing logs for errors and trying to determine what's going on. You can be as simple as you just checking what your uptime is. How long has the machine been up? And that can all be automated, scripted to anyone's desire at this point.
So how does so let's say I have 5 machines. Instead of going into the dashboard of each individual machine, how do I see all those machines kind of in a GUI interface?
Juno, you want to try answering
Um,
that one first?
yeah, so we do have, as I mentioned earlier, we do have a management tool called ePIC Dashboard. You can go on our GitLab and then GitHub and then download it. It's free to use. Let me see if I can share that uh,
So one of
that
the big
tool on
I
the
keep
computer.
forgetting is who else are we compatible with? So there are management softwares out there that exist today. Our goal is not to replace them. Are we compatible with? I don't remember the list, Juno.
Yeah, we're compatible with Foreman, PyASIC, Lincoln, and also Miner.
So yeah, so that's another way for you to kind of look at all your machines at once. There's great
Mhm.
management tools out there. I know PyA6 a nice open source one that we're involved in updating as well, and they're completely compatible with the UMC board. So if you've got one miner, use the web dash. If you've
Mhm.
got 5, we do have our ePIC dashboard, which is a management tool, but it was more of something engineering used to monitor and to test in house. It was never meant to scale.
Mhm.
So then that's where you kind of rely on the next step of software, where it's Foreman, you mentioned
Mhm.
Awesome Miner, Lincoin, PyASIC, where you can get that kind of overall site management tool.
Yeah, and that would that be what you use to remote manage? Like, say I want to, manage my miners from a distance. You guys are obviously, Earl, you're not at your house, but you're at your office, so you're managing these miners from a distance. Are you using Foreman or one of these other softwares to do that?
I'm using PyASIC at home right now to manage my machines. You can pretty much use any of those that I mentioned there, and there's a bunch of other open source ones that are quite good. But it's how sophisticated you want to become. It's not meant for everyone. If you're at
Mhm.
1, 2 machines, I don't think it's needed. But once you start scaling, that's something to think about right away, because as I mentioned before, tuning one machine, dealing with one machine is nice. You have the time, but as soon as those numbers start multiplying, it does consume a lot of time, and
Yeah.
automation is the way to go.
Absolutely. I completely agree with that. I've spent hours just playing around with the dashboard on my one machine, just trying to like change a setting and then sitting there waiting for it to do its thing and then like, oh, that didn't work, so I got to go and change it again. And I've spent just like so much time doing that. I can't imagine trying to do that with, 10, 50, 100 different machines.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
that brings us back to there are a bunch of solutions out there for you to get more control of your machine. There's some great firmwares out there that we talk to all the time. We all know each other. It's a very small community. But what really differentiates ourselves from the rest is we don't charge a development fee. Um, Early on, when we were building our own products, which we still do today, we developed a control board for them, and it kind of spun off into this whole separate line of business for us. And we are hardware at heart. We sell hardware, and that's what we sell to our end user. The software, the firmware that comes with it that we update monthly is free. We don't charge a development fee in the sense of charging 1, 2, 3% on top of your revenue, not even your profit, but your revenue. We did the calculation, and over time, it's just not beneficial to the end user, especially to a home miner that's looking to use a machine for longer than an industrial miner. So typical home miners will buy a machine, it's a large investment, and they will be looking to run this machine for a longer period of time. And as soon as you do that kind of calculation of 2, 3% on top of what you're making in profit before your electricity costs, it's not a worthwhile decision to do. But the features of those firmwares are what makes them valuable. So we kind of offer those features and all the tools that you would have, but in a one cost to a piece of hardware. And we sell you hardware. There's warranty on the hardware, and the firmware is on our GitHub. We release it once a month. So I think that's what really separates us from our competitors or peers in the industry at this point.
Yeah,
That's
that
really
was actually
attractive.
yeah, I was actually going to ask that question. And then when you started answering it, I was like, oh man, see, this is exactly what we need in this space. We need a company who is building hardware for the end user and not specifically just to build hardware. And I really like that. And I think that's, that's one thing that is going to keep me coming back to ePIC to continue using your products, because it benefits me in more than just one way. And I really enjoy that. I really think that that's like the right ethos to have as a Bitcoin company.
Yeah, as a miner, it's kind of like it makes it so much easier, and I think more economical as an operator, because when you have those fees, it's kind of like an operating expense. But when you're buying hardware, it's like a capital expense. And so that I just think that makes the math easier on the accounting and helps miners probably feel more confident about achieving ROI. So I really like that.
Yeah, so one of the things we've done is we've made a new version of the control board. I don't think, Trevor, you have this one yet. And Juno can introduce it and kind of tell why this is the next generation of our control board at this point.
Yeah, so our previous generation was just a one board design, but this one, the latest generation, you can see there's a smaller board on top of a bigger board. So the bottom is what we called the carrier board with all the connectors, hashboard connectors, Ethernet, all that stuff. And on top of it, this is a system of module, what we call SOMs board, is where the brain lives, where the firmware lives here. So the purpose of doing this is that if in case that a manufacturer decide to change their form factor, we can easily just change this carrier board and then accommodate that specific form factor very quickly. While you can, as a user, you can just keep this and replace the brain of the control board instead.
So the brains is what costs the most money. That carrier board is a bunch of connectors. And that same brain, that SOM board you see there, is what we use in our own mining products, Bitmain products, What's Miner products, and probably a few others in the future. But that carrier board is a low-cost replacement. So we've seen changes in Bitmain's manufacturing over the years, going from the S19 to the S19K. The fan connectors changed. Going from the S19K XP over to the S21s, the form factor changed to the Pro and XP series of the S21s. That module can be reused, and it reduces the overhead cost of upgrading over time. The compute horsepower needed to run mining software isn't growing, but the fact that if there are multiple form factors, no one wants to buy another board over and over and over again. As you mentioned, it's still a CapEx cost. So we've kind of developed it into two boards, a carrier board that can be low cost, easily replaced, and the brains of it, as Juno mentioned, where you buy that and you can just move it from module to module at this point.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And again, you guys are making it a lot more simple for the end user to mine in different scenarios, different setups. We're coming to the end of this podcast, and there's always a couple of things that I want to touch on that I like to ask my audience. But before I do that, I just I'd like to know, like you had mentioned in the thing that you sent, the app. I'm totally blanking on what it is, but you sent me a bunch of information earlier. And you had mentioned that there was a new partnership that you guys are working at. Is that something that you can touch on? You can tell us a little bit about any new products or partnerships that you have going on.
So a lot of the times we build our own chips, but it becomes very risky at this point. Very competitive space Bitcoin mining has become. So we've partnered over the years with various chip vendors. Our initial partner was with Intel with their BZM chip, and we made products with that. A year and a half, 2 years ago, we announced a partnership with an Israeli company called Chain Reaction, which we'll be coming to market with a product with them. And most recently, we announced work being done with Block. So there is a lineup of products coming out from ePIC. We are trying to ensure that the control board you see in front of you will be used in all of them. And that will allow people to use the same firmware, same API, same look, same feel in all of their future mining endeavors. We call it a universal mining controller because that brain really works with Intel, Chain Reaction, Block, What's Miner, and a few others that we'll be adding on later in this year. So that's truly the goal. The end user doesn't really care, I think, about what the machine is under the hood. They care about the power, the hash rate, the temperatures. And if we plan to unify that in a single firmware, is probably the end goal of this product at this point.
Wow, that's incredible. So far you guys are just drawing me more and more into ePIC and using your guys' company as my sole hardware provider, because that's just you're thinking about me, the end user, at the end of the day, and that's what I really like to see in a company. So
Yeah, appreciate that.
yeah, it's been a lot of fun on this episode. I really enjoyed just like learning about what the functionalities are and like the ways that I can use it. I think that I'm going to have a better understanding of, my machine and what I can do with it. But that, I have a question for you guys, and I'd like you each to answer individually. This is really more of the philosophical side of things. So, you can kind of just take this question however you want to run with it, however long you want to run with it. But Juno, I want to know, what does Bitcoin mean to you?
I will tell you the story of this. So as you know, I live in Canada. And a couple of years ago, I went to visit my friend in San Francisco. And I had to pay her. She pays for something for me. I had to pay her back. But it was very difficult for me to just send a wire transfer from a Canadian bank account to a US bank account. And then later on, I figured out that she holds Bitcoin as well. And I was like, okay, can you just receive Bitcoin instead? And that transaction really helped me to take a lot of headache out of going through the bank, with paying the bank fees, and waiting a couple of days to process. It was really instant. So for me, it was very powerful in that way.
Yeah, just the instant transfer of money instead of having to go through a third party, verify all your information. And then even sometimes still, they don't allow you to send too much or too little. And they're going to take a percentage off of that every
A
single time you
huge
send
chunk
money.
of, exactly.
Exactly. So I think that's actually a really great answer, because, a lot of people don't think about, money transfer outside of their own little circle. And, I think one of the biggest use cases that drew me in was this idea that, like, there's families, like first generation immigrants, that live here in this country, and they send a lot of money to their families, whether it be, the Philippines or Mexico or Indonesia or wherever it is. And if you think about it, like, these wire transfers or money transmitters, you have to go into a specific building first and foremost. And there's a lot of gang violence and activity happening in these third world countries where, if you are going into a specific building, you're really creating a target for yourself. And that right there is a danger and a attack vector for a lot of people, and they're extorted for their money. Whereas Bitcoin, not only do you not have the fees that are associated with it, you now have the ability to receive that money anywhere in the world from the comfort of your own home. So I think what you touched on there is really important. You used it just to be able to send money, to your friend without having to, connect to a third party bank and pay these fees. But a lot of people are using it to send money to their families back home without having to open themselves up to these attack vectors from different areas. So that's really, really cool. I like that the way that you put that.
So for me, people talk a lot about Bitcoin being own your own keys, own your own money, be your own bank. And I believe in all of that. And I think that's truly valuable as a society today. But Bitcoin really has given me the opportunity to be my own boss. That's what really changed for me. I worked in a corporate environment for a decade and a half, and I really enjoyed it. But in the end, Bitcoin has given me this opportunity to start a company, meet new people, be on a podcast. I don't think I would ever be approved at a corporate company, be on a podcast as an engineer. That's what really represents to me. Being my own boss, doing what I want, doing what I enjoy, and meeting new people that we see here today.
Yeah, no, that's a great answer too. I haven't heard that one yet. I think at the end of the day, Bitcoin gives us freedom to live the life that we really want to live. And what you're touching on is just the ability to build a business and live your life the way that you want, run your business the way that you want, pay your employees the way that you want, and not have to worry about, again, what a third party thinks about how you are running your business and operating. I think that's a really, really great touch point. Awesome. Well, guys, this was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed you coming on the show today. I, appreciate you guys giving me the time. We're a very small podcast, and sometimes I feel like it's a hassle for a lot of people to come on here and just talk for an hour. But, you guys really you flew through that. You explained everything so technically and in depth. And I really appreciate, you guys doing this for us and for our audience.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us. Hopefully we'll be on a second time, and we'll go deeper down into the world of mining.
Absolutely. So, can you just really quickly tell people where they can find you, individually, if you'd like people to be able to reach out to you, and then also ePIC Blockchain?
So we're pretty active on Twitter, so you can reach out to us through @ePIC Blockchain. That's our social media handle. And also you can send us email at info@epicblockchain.io as well.
Awesome. I'll make sure that is in the description. And, again, to the audience, I really want to send people to your guys' website because they're going to be able to, get this hardware. Could you really quickly tell us what the price is of the most recent version of the board so that people have an idea of what they're going to pay when they walk out with one?
Yeah, so we do work with a retail distributor called Altair Tech, which you can later on plug in the website. I believe they're selling around $150 per board right now.
Okay,
sometimes
so really,
there's sales going on as well.
Yeah, that's a really doable price point for a board, honestly. Awesome. Well, Will, do you have anything else to say before we close this up?
I'm really grateful to you guys for coming on. I learned a lot. I'm, excited to try some things out and share with my team. And I hope other miners in our audience who are, needing better ways to remotely manage their operations can look you guys up and benefit from what you guys have built. So thank you again so much for coming on.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Thank you for having us.
Absolutely.
Appreciate it.
To the audience, I just want to say thank you so much for listening. We appreciate you guys' time, and we hope that you guys will send us some feedback about the episodes, how we're doing. We're always trying to iterate and do better. But until next time, we will see you on the next episode.
Please note, the Build a Mine podcast provides information for general educational purposes only. This information should not be construed as legal, financial, or investment advice. We do not guarantee the accuracy or completeness of any information presented, and we encourage you to consult with a professional advisor, legal advisor, and/or financial advisor before making any financial decisions. The Build a Mine podcast and its affiliates are not responsible for any losses incurred as a result of using the information provided.